Welcome to West Country Wanderings and welcome to one in my Cornwall series, although at this precise moment I'm actually in the neighbouring county of Devon. And today we're going to be having a look at the source of the River Tamar and also a couple of aspects to do with the Bude Canal, which lies a little bit further and slightly to the south of where I currently am. Well, where am I currently? I'm currently in North Devon, near the Cornwall border. And the reason I've decided to open the video here is because this tiny little stream, which has barely got a flow on it, even though we've had a very wet winter here in May, is one of the three sources of the River Torridge. The River Tamar, however, has its source, well, a lot less than half a mile south of where I currently am. I'll insert a map now so it all makes sense. I'm close to the Atlantic Highway, the A39, which is the main road that goes between Barnstaple right down to Falmouth in far southwest Cornwall. We're just off of that, about half mile off that, on a minor road which goes to Bradworthy. If you look at the OS map, you'll see orange bit edged, which means it's public asset land, which this is here, though that side there is private woodlands. We're not going in there, but this tiny little stream, this is the source of the River Torridge, which doesn't flow down towards a southerly direction like the Tamar does, but decides to curve north and ends up in the Bristol Channel in North Devon. And you're probably thinking, why with two rivers, two famous West Country rivers, the Tamar and the Torridge, going completely opposite directions? Well, if you follow my channel at all, you'll realise we've come across this before when we're looking at the River Severn, and the River Wye rises very close to the River Severn, and that decides to take a different route, although they do rejoin later. But this one does. Not all so far from here is the source of the River Tavy, and that links up with our story with the Tamar, because the Tavy links to the Tamar a lot further south below the town of Tavistock. So I hope you can join me for this little wander. We will be entering Cornwall shortly, looking for the source of the Tamar and telling you the story about how the Torridge and the Tamar are all intrinsically linked in a fable all about Tamara. Now, I'm sure many of you already realise that the River Tamar famously forms the border between Devon and Cornwall. Some people think that Cornwall is a nation, the nation of Cornwall, distinct from the rest of England. It's a very, very different place. However, the River Tamar doesn't form the border between Devon and Cornwall all the way. It does up here in North Cornwall, and it does further south. But there are a couple of bits where the border diverges away from the river. It does these odd kind of squiggly movements. Now, I've got into a couple of books and onto Google, of course, and other search engines are available, and I can't find the reasons for those deviations from the source, or rather the route, the course of the River Tamar, why it does that. If you do know, please drop a comment in the video below. And now making my way to the source of the River Tamar, which is on Woolly Moor, again not far from the A39, and we'll have a look at that because recently, I think it was towards the end of last year, there's been a monument or a plaque created by a local artist which has been placed there. So we'll go and have a look at that in a bit. Penfenton Tup Bude Tamar, the source of the River Tamar, here on Woolly Moor in North Cornwall. This is the start of the famous Tamar River, which runs south from here and enters the English Channel south, or next to the large city of Plymouth, which is obviously on the opposite side in the county of Devon. But we have those odd little squiggles. There's two of them, I think, where it doesn't follow the River Tamar. Now, there's lots of legend around the River Tamar, or should I say Tamara. Like we have Sabrina with the River Severn, we have Tamara with the River Tamar. And she was, in legend, a water nymph. Now at this point here there isn't a lot to show you in terms of a flow of water. That's Woolly Moor over there, and it continues on the opposite side of this minor road here in North Cornwall, and it goes through there. And if you look at the OS map on that side, going through this woodland are several, I think it's 5 parallel ditches, and that is our flow of our river heading south from here till it joins up with 2 lakes. Now one of those lakes was built in 1970, Upper Tamar Lake, and it's now managed and administered by the South West Lakes Trust. And also there you have another lake now called the Lower Tamar Lake. Prior to 1970, of course, there was only one Tamar Lake, and that was built in 1820 to provide water for the Bude Canal. So yes, you've guessed it, that's where we're heading next, to the Tamar Lakes, to tell you about the legend of Tamara and also the interlink between the Torridge and the Tavy and why they flow in different directions and why the Tavy meets Tamara later on flowing south. So I hope you can join me for that. So I've now come round to Upper Lake. There's 2 lakes here, as I mentioned, Upper and Lower Tamar Lake. The Upper Lake is now part of the South West Lakes Trust. They look after several of the reservoirs that were built often in the 60s, 70s and 80s in both Devon and Cornwall, managed by South West Water, and they look after the facility here. There's also a water sports facility here. There's toilets here and a cafe, though the cafe isn't open every day. I'll put a link to the website of the South West Lakes Trust if you want to visit Tamar Lakes here in North Cornwall, but also there are other facilities. I know they have one at Stithians, and we covered a previous one when I made the video at David Stowe Moor, looking at that area there at Colliford Lake. So they're really good places just to chill out and explore. This one here is really good because it has accessible paths all the way around the reservoir. I think it's about 3 miles long. But what I'm going to do today in this video is head down to the Lower Tamar Lake, which was built in 1820. Primarily to provide a water supply for the Bude Canal. And just south of the Lower Tamar Lake is an aqueduct, so I hope to have a look at that as well, including a wharf. While I'm doing all of that though, I want to tell you the story about Tamara and the water nymph and how the 2 rivers were trying to compete for her advances. It's a really interesting tale, so I hope you can join me for that on the walk later. So now I'm walking on the dam. It's actually a gravity dam. The reservoir was first planned in 1970 and the site covers 32 hectares, what's that, about 80 acres, something like that, and it will hold 1,400 litres of water. See some water just percolating out of it there. And it was constructed by a company called WC French. Work started in 1971. It was almost complete by 1975 and it was officially opened in 1977 to provide water supplies to the town of Bude and the villages that surround this part of North Cornwall and North Devon. So I'm here now in North Devon, having walked over that dam. The line of the border actually goes through the middle of the reservoir because the River Tamar, the Tamara, where we saw that spring, is coming down here in a line through the middle of the reservoir before the reservoir was built, so it would have just come down, just a small stream really at this point here, following the line of the reservoir and then making its way down there into the lower lake, which we'll see shortly. But it's a tremendous site. As I say, it's now a very popular activity centre. Tamara was a water nymph who lived in the underworld. Her parents were rather strict, but Tamara was a free nymph. She wanted to live freely, to enjoy the land and to admire it. But her parents, because they were strict, forbade her from doing that. One day, Tamara decided to go against the advice and instruction of her parents. She left her home and decided to go for a wander on Dartmoor. When she was on Dartmoor, she came across 2 giants, one called Tavy, the other one called Torridge. Now both these giants, on meeting Tamara, were rather smitten with her, and both of them vied for her attention. Now Tamara, being a water nymph, was very agile. She could move freely, very quickly and easily. The two giants, Torridge and Tavy, were still vying for her attention, but she decided to lead them a merry dance. Whenever they got closer to her, she flitted very quickly away. Now when Tamara didn't return home, Tamara's father started looking for her. He saw her with the two giants, and he instantly flew into a fit of rage. He caught up with the giants. Tamara by this time had flitted off, and he cast a spell on Torridge and Tavy. Tamara, meanwhile, was watching all of this from a distance. She saw her father in the fit of rage casting the spell on Tavy and Torridge. When her father finally caught up with her, she said she would never return to home because she was so annoyed with what her father had done to the two giants. Still, with rage racing through him, her father cast another spell, this time onto her daughter, Tamara, and he turned her from a water nymph into bubbling springs, which now form the source of the River Tamar. Giant Torridge awoke from the spell that Tamara's father had cast upon him. He then sought the advice of a magician. He was horrified when he also discovered that Tamara had been turned into a river. The magician advised Torridge to also have a spell, and he cast that upon Torridge, turning the giant also into a river. Now Torridge had become a river. He then sought to meet up with Tamara's river, the Tamar. But unfortunately, although he'd been turned into a river in a spring near the same spring that the Tamar is from, he made a wrong turn, and instead of heading south, where Tamara was heading for, he headed north to the North Devon town of Bideford and ended up in the Bristol Channel. So behind me here, before we continue our story about Tamara, is New Bridge. And here is Devon. I'm going to walk back over New Bridge, walking over Tamara, aka the River Tamar, which is just down there as it comes from the dam, Upper Tamar Lakes, and underneath this road heading into the Lower Tamar Lake, which was built for the Bude Canal in 1820. And then it joins another footpath, a new route, which is called the Tamara Coast to Coast Trail. And the reason that's important is it means you can now walk around the entirety of Cornwall. You of course can walk around the coast of Cornwall on the southwest coast path, should I say, which starts up at Marsland Mouth, more about Marsland Mouth in a bit, all the way down to Land's End along the south coast till you get to Plymouth Sound, which means there's a missing bit, the land bit, where Devon joins Cornwall, and that's where the Tamara Coast to Coast Trail comes in. And it starts at Marsland Mouth and it joins up with the source of the River Tamar, where we almost started our video today, and then it heads following the Tamar pretty much all the way to where it joins the English Channel. It's good to see here that the symbol of the Tamara Coast to Coast footpath is the water nymph. Back to our story. So our poor giant Torridge has been turned into a river, but has missed seeing Tamara. He's headed the wrong way into the Bristol Channel. But what about our other giant, Tavy? Well, Tavy sought the advice of his father, who was a retired magician. And he gave him the advice that he could also turn him into a river, but he gave it with full consent and gave him good guidance on how he could find Tamara. So Tavy was turned into a river by his father, and he sought out where Tamara was across Bodmin Moor, heading south and he eventually, finally, found her just before Tamara met the sea, joining up with Tamara to form a wide and very beautiful estuary. The River Tamar, or Tamara if you prefer, is the source of much Cornish and some Devon legend hereabouts. It's an important river, not least of which, as it heads further south, it goes through the very beautiful Tamar Valley, which is now an area of outstanding natural beauty, and there's lots of an important archaeological and industrial archaeological remains, particularly at places like Tavistock and Morwellham Quay. There is a canal round there, the Tavistock Canal, but it's to another canal I'm walking to now, or rather the remains of it, and that's the Bude Canal. And the lower Tamar Lake here was built to provide water for that canal in 1820. The canal was complete in around about 1826, but it's probably the most unusual canal in the whole of the United Kingdom. Now, when we think of canals, we normally think of them starting in one place and finishing in another, from A to B. But the Bude Canal does nothing like that at all. If you can imagine the Bude Canal shaped like a cross. The northern part of it goes to the North Cornwall town of Bude, where it met the sea, and still does. That section is still in water for about 3 or 4 miles to the village of Church. But there were a number of inclines on the route, and it then headed south inland, and you have that cross shape, so you have a cross bit going out, extending out to the right or to the east, and a section going into the west. Now, the lower Tamar Lake here is an important wildlife reserve, also managed by the South West Lakes Trust, and you can see the sort of things you can see around here: willow tits, marsh tits, and goosander. It's an important habitat for them. It's particularly important in winter, provides a really secure wintering and sheltering habitat. It's good to see that we also have a rather lovely bird hide here as well, looking across the lower Tamar Lake. Let's go in and have a look. Now, if you remember, I mentioned earlier that the Tamara coast-to-coast path doesn't start at the source of the River Tamar that we saw earlier in the video, but starts right on the coast, on the North Cornish and North Devon coast. And it starts at a place called Marsland Mouth, and I was actually there a couple of evenings ago. I have made a separate video about Marsland Mouth last year. I'll put a link to that at the end of this video. But when I got there, the light was beautiful. So I'm just going to share with you a no commentary video, just highlighting the beauty of Marsland Mouth, where the Tamara coast-to-coast path starts. I hope you enjoyed that little sequence there from Marsden and Bath. We're back here at the Lower Tamar Lakes, and personally speaking I prefer this one. There's a lot more wildlife around here, it's a lot greener, it looks a lot less clinical because that dam, obviously it does important work providing water for the local people in this part of North Cornwall. It is a bit kind of, well, industrial, but this is much more pleasant, it's much more my sort of thing. We're going to continue on walking on it till we get to the aqueduct. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that. I think there might be a wharf there as well, so something marked on the map, so I'm not too sure, but let's go with the flow and have a look. So this, what you're looking at here, is part of the Bude Canal, just below the weir at the Lower Tamar Lake. And I think that brickwork there is the original construction from when the lake was built in 1820, and you can see that that is not actually a canal tunnel, so they wouldn't have narrow boats or anything going through there. But this was the feeder, so the water would have come out of the reservoir and gone along this section of the Bude Canal here to feed other sections of it, as we'll see. I think what we're looking at here is a stop lock for the canal. There is the water coming out of the lake, coming through here, so if they needed to close that off, they could put some shuttering along there to dredge that section of the, well, effectively culvert, isn't it? But it's clearly delineated along and it's following the contour. And here we have a sluice on the canal. So there's our canal there. And this sluice would have been opened to control the flow, the amount of water that's in this section of the canal. And then it will flow down there back into the River Tamar. Here is our Bude Canal again. Just going to swing along. So obviously we're on the higher contour here. We're swinging across, and a beautiful little copse or woodland here with some fungi in it. And just down there, in there, is the River Tamar flowing its way south to the English Channel. Now, surprised to see Tamara here by the side of the Bude Canal. There's Tamara, our water nymph, and the river itself is just the other side of that fence line in the dip there, and our canal again is just here running alongside. Looks good to see that a lot of clearance work has taken place here, been coppicing taken place to clear the branches of the trees that overhang the canal this section, and some of the worst weeds have been cut out of the canal as well. So this is the side of Burnworthy Wharf. I was surprised to see that the building, the wharf side building of the Bude Canal here at this point is still extant. And you can also make out there is a marker, I think it's just around about there, a marker where boats would have been tied up. And here the sand would have been unloaded from the tugboats on the canal and then used in the fields hereabouts to fertilise them. Lots of commotion behind me. There is a peacock on the roof of the cottage alongside the wharf. Peacock's just on the top there. Don't know if you can just make that out against the lovely little white cottage there. Now just down the track, the lane, Burnworthy Wharf, is another little bridge. And unusually, rather than it saying welcome to Cornwall, it has the single word just saying Kerno. And so this is a second bridge over the River Tamar, the first one being New Bridge, which we saw earlier in today's video. Now standing by the bridge that says Kerno, looking back up towards the Bude Canal, and you can see the gradient difference between the River Tamar, which was obviously at a much lower gradient than the Bude Canal here at Burnworthy Wharf. And alongside the Bude Canal here at Vernworthy Wharf, we have another one of these wonderful plaques on the Tamar Coast to Coast Trail. Now this one shows the bridge over the canal here, and we have the tugboats which would have went along the canal. It's tied up there along the side of the wharf here, and you can see it's carrying sand. Wonderful. Here at Vernworthy Wharf, you've got this little museum in the old building that's alongside the wharf, presumably for storage facility, perhaps for the sand originally. And this is the tugboats, or a mock-up of the tugboats that were used on the inclines there, and it also shows the tugboat wheels and different examples of those. And you've got the set stone which was used to anchor down the tracking there as it went down the rails. And they used inclines on this canal instead of the usual locks that we've seen previously in my canal series. You also have these unusual milestone markers here. Here one's saying 14 miles to Bude, and like the ones we've seen on the Kennet and Avon Canal and the Somerset Coal Canal, Thames and Severn Canal, etc., these are made out of cast iron. Here on the edge of the wharf, there's the canal back in there, we have this combined boundary marker, BHC there, and also it was used as a tethering post for the tugboats. And there you can see the width is wider by that tree, and then it narrows, and then there would have been a bridge which carried it under this road and on back towards Lower Tamar Lake. Side of the wharfside building here at Vernworthy is this as well, which I'm not entirely sure how it was used, but it was probably connected to one of the inclined planes, and the tugboats would have come down and ridden on the top of it there with that cast iron underneath, and you get a sense of how this canal would have been very, very expensive to build and also to maintain. Now arrived at Vernworthy Mill, and there's the actual water wheel and the mill race still intact. I'm not sure if it's been restored or recast, but it still looks impressive. There is an older wheel just to the right of it though, the mill building. This is a beautiful section of the Bude Canal. Say its primary function was to provide water for the rest of the canal network, but on this beautiful day it's really wonderful. It's very noticeable here that this section of the canal is raised higher than the land that surrounds it, artificially so, and I think the reason for that is because we're in the River Tamar floodplain, and the ground here is very, very boggy anyway, so in times of heavy rain it would have flooded, which would have completely submerged the canal and the tugboats going along it, which would not have been ideal. So it's raised. When I was at that little museum there in the wharf house at Vernworthy Wharf, I read a fact which astounded me. Before the canal arrived, and obviously its primary function was to get some shells and sand from the Bude area into inland to fertilise the soils, they used to do the same process using horses. And the amazing fact was they had up to 4,000 trips of horses, pannier horses, every single day from the Bude area going inland to fertilise the soils around Devon, North Devon and North Cornwall. Now this section here is a little bit curious. It's got some pile of wood there, which I think is from the canal itself. We have a gate here, and I think originally there would have been a bridge which went over the Bude Canal at this point. You can make out the brickwork, and I think also there was probably a lock on this section. I'll just see if I can get behind me. There, so you can just make out the brickwork of what would have been a lock here on the Bude Canal and a former bridge going over the top. I hope you've enjoyed this little wander today here in North Cornwall, back in Cornwall again. Sorry I haven't been able to produce anything from Cornwall for a little while, but if you're a regular viewer, you know the reason for that. A couple of videos I'm also going to be doing in and around the area over the next couple of days, so look out for those as well. really pleasant walking the Tamar. I haven't got plans to do all of it. I've still got the 7 way to finish as well. And obviously I don't no longer live in Cornwall, so there's a bit more logistically to do. But it's certainly worth doing sections of it, I think. And if you're up for it, then why not tackle the whole thing and include the Southwest Coast Path going around the entirety of Cornwall as well. I'll put some links about that Southwest Coast Path and the Tamara Coast to Coast Path as well. Hope you enjoyed it. See you soon. Bye-bye.